Hi there, and welcome to Considering Comics. This is a special edition. It's in correlation with an article that you're going to read, or possibly are reading already, in Down the Tubes, where essentially I have done an audio accompaniment to the article itself, which is a piece from both Stephen Austin and myself regards our upcoming project Black North. So I don't want to talk too much as an introduction. I'll let the piece speak for itself. So if you're considering reading the piece while listening to the audio also, start reading now. When Down the Tubes staple John Freeman asked me to write a director's commentary via our mutual friend Stephen Austin, I had to check myself. Don't be self-indulgent, I reminded. This is about promoting the work. But removing the self is impossible to do on this project, to an extent. Not because of my closet narcissism, but because despite a desire for humility, an attitude I've fostered since I got into writing comics, I can't talk about the work without talking about how we got there. And that is a personal journey more than a purely transactional one. Comics, I should preface, is a field I never thought I'd penetrate, never mind court success in. Frankly, I feel lucky to be here. I frequently suffer from imposter syndrome, and a lot of the time I have a fear that I'm about to be found out. This isn't the sort of thing that you're supposed to tell people when you're promoting a Kickstarter, but I felt like lying about it wouldn't do me much good either. Straight up, I feel lucky to be here. Privileged that people have thus far enjoyed my work. In the small press, indies and the mainstream, I've enjoyed a fair amount of praise. This hasn't been hurt by my working with some of the best artists in the industry, which also acts as a constant reminder, not only of how hard it is to get work in the mainstream, to network, and work with such fantastic talents, but to beat out all the rampant competition for a seat at the very crowded table that is mainstream comics. I repeat, I feel lucky to be here. And if my childhood self could imagine that some 30 years on, he'd be engaged in the medium that makes him most happy, it would be so unbelievable as to be an alien concept. It must be somebody else, he'd say. With this in mind, it was at Bristol's Lawless Con, a year or two back, where Lady Luck once again shone on me. I was hungover at a signing table with my good friend and comic book superstar, Ryan Brown. He was sketching Dread effortlessly for readers, and I was selling copies of Sector 13, the fanzine I work for and highly recommend from my hometown in Belfast. Across from us, behind an endless line of fans queued for sketches, was Simon Bisley, largely responsible for my hangover, my pal Glenn Fabry, Dylan Talbot and Peter Doherty. To my right was the legendary Mike McCann, to my left was the incredibly lovely David Milgate, and directly to my right at the end of the table was a newish 2000 AD artist named after one of my favourite wrestlers. Stephen Austin was penciling some of the most beautiful Judge Death work I had ever seen. I commented on this and we began a conversation. I can't remember what we talked about, but I recall thinking Stephen was a gentleman. Everyone at our table, with the exception of the Brown and myself, who were hideously hungover, were incredibly cordial. Again, I just felt lucky to be there. I never thought anything would come of it. Facebooks were traded, more drinks were had. We all went home after a grand weekend, yet it wasn't the end, not yet. Fast forward some months, and Stephen comes on my podcast, Considering Comic Books. Afterwards, we have a chat and agree that we'd love to work together. It just needs to be the right project. I'm working on Esther the Relique with Ryan Brown. A large US publisher is courting us, but will inevitably have to drop out due to differences in direction. Ryan's younger brother Adam, a fabulous artist in his own right, pitches one of my strips to 2000 AD editor Matt Smith. Tharg accepts, and we begin work. Meantime, I'm working on a strip with Adam for Comic House editor, the tremendous Pete Jeanpool, along with strips for Sector 13 and Future Quake, with my frequent collaborators Patrick Brown and David Jay. My friend Glenn Fabry decides that we shall pitch Tharg over a coffee one day. We are accepted, though Glenn is going through his own personal hell that year. I suspect on numerous occasions that his health will fail, and I doubt we'll ever finish the project. A year late, and I'm delighted to be proven wrong. I pitched Stephen a straight horror script, having been inspired by Image Comics' Infidel, by Pornsack Pinachote, and Aaron Campbell. We back and forth on the execution, then finally agree. I begin it as prose, my start in writing having been self-published novels, but it doesn't fit. This is largely because my own life is in turmoil. My marriage is collapsing due to my wife's triad illness and my inability to cope with them all. That and an ongoing battle with depression. The horror script feels too close to the bone. I begin counselling, feeling this will help my marriage, and decide to get medicated. During this period of healing, I read and reabsorb much of the material that I loved and continue to love from earlier periods in my life. I revisit those touchstones of my past, searching for that gratifying distraction that has been missing. During a numbing period, I fall back on philosophical consolations, those simple pleasures that keep oneself buoyant during the flood of other anxieties. I reread the Dread Mega Collection, rewatch old John Carpenter movies, read fantasy books, consume a slew of 80s horrors and sci-fi in all mediums. As I'm doing this, I try to remember the last time I was genuinely excited by this sort of material in comics. I can sift small gems like Keck W. and Dave Kendall's Dead World, James Roberts' stellar sci-fi work on Transformers, or Al Ewing's The Immortal Hulk. But largely, I feel unfulfilled by much of what is on the market, and I have dabbled weekly. Over weeks, I take time parsing this from what I suspect could be the effects of a lingering depression. It's my eventual concession that it's a legitimate take. 2000 AD, the DC Vertigo line, heavy metal, French publishers Humanoids, even Marvel and DC mainstream were so much riskier and more interesting 2 decades gone. This is both melancholy and galvanizing. It occurs to me that when George Lucas and Steven Spielberg made their greatest movies, it was in homage to the serials that they beloved as children. What are we as creators if not custodians of wonder, transporters of spirit-lifting ideas? I am a writer. Why aren't I doing something about it? Having always loved Dread's dystopian universe, I decided to follow my instinct to write a dystopian Northern Ireland. Fellow Ulsterman Garth Ennis, Emerald Isle stories always left a derogatory taste in my mouth, yet I'm in love with the post-apocalypse and that particular universe. I write and pitch Black North, the story of an ex-military mole working within the infrastructure of a triad superpower, based in a walled-off future Ulster. It's a 6-page short story, but I think it's got legs and could work within Sector 13 or Dread the magazine. Sector 13 fear it's too close to home, and Tharg doesn't respond, I suspect due to it being open season for submissions. Either way, no one's interested. Time passes. My wife's illness is stabilising, our relationship is slowly mending, and I am very slowly regaining a foothold on my life. Amidst this, I can't get the idea of Black North out of my head. My friend and local comic shop proprietor Aaron Flanagan suggests we should do something together, with him acting as publisher. I write a 4-page treatment of Black North as a 96-page graphic novel. Character profiles, technology, environment, the whole world build. Aaron reads it and loves it. With this encouragement, I contact Steve. He reads my treatment and similarly signs off on it. Things are starting to move. We agree this will be a project rooted in our love of all things that now seem safe, or too taboo to tackle with any sort of authenticity. Edgy sci-fi, philosophical horror, characters that refuse to pander to a creeping political correctness. A story that is at once entertaining, suffused parallel with a deeper lining. Something that asks you to think but doesn't tell you what to think. Time moves quickly. Having seen Steve's character work in interior pages from their inception to completion, I have no doubt that this book will be visually stunning. The addition of the sage Dave Evans of Futurequake Press in the dual roles of editor and letterer give the project gravity. John Burtis, 2000 AD superfan, keeper of the Cellar of Dread, and staple on the Everything Comes Back to 2000 AD podcast, adds a legitimacy, bringing his military expertise to the action set pieces and soldiering semantics of the script. And finally there's me, a writer who frequently suffers from imposter syndrome and feels genuinely lucky to be here, pushing an idea born out of nostalgia, assembled among the mass of personal trauma, forged out of a joint love of the genre and the medium. I can't think of a project that has spun more deeply from the hearts of fans. Everyone involved has worked to make this project as good as it can be, not just out of professionalism, but because they felt passionate in the making of it. That's why, in talking about the work, it inevitably became personal. These things are personal. For me, it's because this sort of fictional reprieve helped me so many times in my life to escape the pain or mundanity of my ordinary life. I think this is why we as fans chase the extraordinary, for that escape, the security of another world. So it is personal. This is a personal project for we, the fans, for you, the fans. We've invested that part of ourselves that loves the unrestrained and the extraordinary in it, and hope you will feel that when you consume the material. Because we, like you, want material out there that we can fall into and escape in. Our Kickstarter is coming soon. We hope you'll join us. Best, Mark. Having been a lifelong fan of comics, getting into the industry came late for me. I was 43 when I decided to take the plunge and leave a career I was doing well at, but hated, behind. The birth of my first son and chance meeting with the childhood hero was the impetus that launched me into something I've always wanted to do, but for various reasons have shied away from. Having decided to make the move, it made sense to cut my teeth in the small press, hone my skills, see if I had what it takes. Could I tell a story? Meet deadlines? I didn't bloody know. My first work was for the Psychedelic Journal of Time Travel. The publisher of this small press anthology, Owen Watts, approached me via the 2000 AD forums, where I was regularly posting submissions work I was preparing to send it into Tharg. I found the storytelling came quite naturally to me. Polishing my sketchy style wasn't quite as simple. I'd basically given up on the art many years previous, and only ever pulled it out after parties, stoned, following a night out with friends. Tell me what to draw, I'd say. Following the strip for PJOTT, I was well and truly bitten by the bug. I began to submit regularly to Tharg, and as soon as I would receive a reply turning down my latest attempt, but offering some advice, I'd frantically start working on the next, all the while drawing as many small press stories as I could for PJOTT, Futurequake, Zarjazz, Bombscare, and others. Finally, I got my break with 2000 AD following a dread story I drew for Zarjazz and submitted to Matt Smith for review. I was greeted with enthusiasm from the Mighty One, who stated he'd like to see more of my work. I showed him another strip I had just finished for Futurequake, and he said he'd be in touch. Fast forward 6 months and I received my first script for a Future Shock. Since then I've drawn Time Twisters, a Black Museum story, a couple of thrillers, and I've just completed my second Dread cover. I love what I do, but don't do nearly enough of it. That's why when I had a chance encounter with Mark McCann at Lawgiver 2018, and we discussed the possibility of working on a project together, I jumped at the opportunity. If I'm honest, I was unfamiliar with Mark's work at the time, but him and I hit it off straight away, and I knew he was somebody I could effortlessly collaborate with. Mark initially sent me a horror script, and although I liked the sound of it, I wasn't entirely sure it was something I would want to draw. It was a slow burner, and I really wanted to get my teeth into some action. We bounced ideas back and forth for the horror script, but I don't think the energy for it was there, at least not from my part. Things went quiet between Mark and I for a while, and then one day, during a catch-up, he mentioned the idea for Black North. This was a different beast altogether. I was gripped, excited, and straight away could see its potential. It's a dark, gritty, grown-up sci-fi thriller that as a fan I would love to read. This enthusiasm was shared by all involved, and I set about drawing 6 initial pages we could use to promote a Kickstarter. The pages introduced the main characters and set the scene for the story. They're essentially a trailer. We plan on releasing one of the pages every day leading up to the release of the Kickstarter, and we truly believe and hope that we will be met with the same enthusiasm we have for the project. As avid and lifelong 2000 AD fans, it is a story for the fans, by the fans. Thanks, Stephen.